The first sign came when the town's water went flat and metallic, like somebody had dropped a handful of coins into every glass. In 2014, in Lindsborg, Kansas, that taste spread block by block right as the summer fair lights went up and the street banners snapped in the warm wind. People blamed old pipes, heat, the river running low, anything normal that let them keep their routines. Then, a child's bicycle showed up on the Smoky Hill Riverbank with the chain still spinning, slow and stubborn, and the girl who rode it never came home. By dusk, a delivery van sat behind the grocery with the engine still running, the rear doors hanging open, and nobody in the driver's seat. A puddle of treated water had pooled under the bumper like it had been dumped on purpose, clean-looking water in the wrong place at the wrong time. Before sunrise, one of our plant operators found the main intake hatch standing open down by the river. The padlock hung on the hasp like it had been unhooked by careful hands, not cut or broken, just opened. A sheriff's deputy climbed down to look and never answered his radio again. By noon, the town had worked itself into a tight, angry knot. Folks gathered at the water tower on the hill, pointing at a thin line of wetness creeping down the paint, darkening it in a single vertical stripe, as if something inside kept bleeding through. A man stood just out of reach in the shade of the ladder cage, not pacing, not hiding, just waiting for somebody to come close enough to do what he wanted. When the operator finally did, the man moved first, and the tower turned from a landmark into a trap that felt like it sealed from the inside. Let me walk you through what really happened that day, the way it unfolded minute by minute, the way a normal job became a problem with teeth. At the time, I was 32, and I'd lived in Lindsborg my whole life. I'd seen floods and ice storms and the kind of summer heat that buckles asphalt, but I'd never seen a town's mood change the way it does when people stop trusting the water coming out of their own taps. My name is Gavin Holt, and I worked for the city water department, which sounds boring until you picture how many things depend on one person opening the right valve at the right time and noticing the one gauge that doesn't match the others. I got the call at 5:12 a.m. from Marcy Vila, my supervisor, and I knew it was bad just from the way she said my name. "Gavin, you awake?" "I am now. Something's off at the river intake. Sheriff wants eyes on it. Get there." She didn't say good morning. She didn't say please. Marcy wasn't rude. She was efficient, and at 5:12 a.m., efficiency means somebody's already nervous. I drove with my coffee in the cup holder and my boots still half-laced, the kind of sloppy you only allow yourself when you think you're heading to a routine call-out. The sky had that pale, washed look it gets before a hot day, and the air smelled like cut grass and river mud. The Smoky Hill sat low and slow, sliding past the trees like it was tired, and when I pulled up to the gate, the chain link was shut like always, the sign still there warning people to keep out, the kind of sign nobody reads until it's too late. The hatch was the problem. It sat in a concrete pad by the bank, a round steel lid over the intake vault, and we kept it locked because kids did dumb things, and because adults did dumb things too, just with better excuses. That morning the padlock hung there closed, not cut, not twisted, not scarred, but the hasp sat free like somebody had opened it and then put it back for show. That detail tightened my stomach. If you force a lock, it shows. If you cut it, it screams. This didn't scream at all. This was polite. Marcy arrived a few minutes later in her city truck, stepping out with her hair in a bun and a clipboard in hand like she could bully the day into behaving if she looked official enough. She stopped at the hatch and leaned in without touching it, like it might bite. "Tell me you forgot to lock it," she said. I didn't. She crouched and studied the lock, eyes sharp, breath steady. Marcy had worked water longer than me, and she trusted patterns the way some people trust luck. A cruiser rolled up on the gravel shoulder, tires crunching slow. Sheriff Dean Carver got out, tall and lean, with that tired look local law gets when they'd rather be doing anything besides explaining to a town why something doesn't make sense. He walked right up to us, hands on his belt, and stared at the open hasp. "You guys find anything?" he asked. "Just this," Marcy said, and pointed. Dean didn't speak for a second. Then he said the one thing I was thinking. "That's not kids." "No," I said. "That's someone with a key." Dean turned and waved his deputy over. Caleb Hurst climbed out of the passenger seat, late 20s, friendly, new enough that he still tried to make everybody like him. He jogged up with his radio clipped high and a flashlight already in hand, like he wanted to look useful. Caleb peered into the opening. "You want me to go down there?" Marcy started to answer, but I cut in because I'd been inside that vault enough times to know how small it felt when you were tired and sweaty. "We don't go down alone," I said. "It's tight, wet, and the ladder gets slick." Caleb gave me a grin like I'd worried too much. "I've been in crawl spaces. I'll be fine." Dean nodded once, the kind of nod that ends discussion. "Quick look, then we lock it back up and figure out who had keys." Caleb swung the hatch lid fully open and clipped his radio tighter to his shoulder, as if a better clip could save him from whatever was waiting down there. He swung down into the vault, boots finding the ladder rungs, headlamp cutting a clean circle through shadow. The air coming up was damp and cold compared to the morning heat, and it carried that sour river smell that clings to concrete. "Smells like river," he called from below, casual, like he wanted to prove he wasn't nervous. I stood over the opening and watched his headlamp beam move across the concrete walls. I didn't like the way it moved. It was too smooth, too steady, like he wasn't turning his body as much as he should. Then the beam pointed straight up at us, as if somebody down there had lifted it and aimed it. "Caleb?" Dean said. No answer. Dean leaned closer, his voice still controlled. "Caleb, talk to me." The radio on Dean's belt gave a short burst of static and then nothing. Not quiet, not dead air, just nothing, like somebody had pulled the plug on the world. Marcy grabbed my arm. "Gavin, don't!" I already had my flashlight out. I shined it down, bracing my shoulder against the concrete rim. Caleb wasn't on the ladder. He wasn't on the floor either. My beam hit wet concrete and the dark mouth of the intake pipe, the big round opening that fed raw river water toward the plant. On the lowest rung of the ladder, a dark smear streaked sideways as if something had been dragged past it. Dean's face changed in 1 second. It wasn't panic. It was focus, the kind that makes a person dangerous because it cuts away everything else. He drew his pistol and backed up. "Step away," he said. "Both of you." Marcy and I moved without arguing, because when a sheriff says it that way, you listen. Dean spoke into his shoulder radio. "Dispatch, I need units to river intake. Now." His radio answered with another useless hiss. Dean looked at the radio like he wanted to throw it. Then he looked at me like I was the one piece of the puzzle he could still use. "How else do you get in and out of that vault?" he asked. "There's the hatch," I said. "And there's the pipe to the treatment building, but it's not walkable. Not for a grown man. You'd have to crawl, and it narrows." Dean stared into the hole again, jaw tight. "So where'd he go?" I didn't have a clean answer. That made it worse, because clean answers are what keep small towns calm. Marcy swallowed and pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the mayor." Dean held up a hand. "Call whoever you want, but you two stay put. Nobody goes down there." Then he did something smart that I didn't appreciate until later. He took my keys. "Your truck key, Gavin," he said, flat, not asking. I handed them over, and he tossed them into Marcy's truck bed, away from the hatch, away from any urge I might have had to drive off and do something brave and stupid. Dean knew my type. Water guys like me spend their lives fixing problems with our hands, and when a problem turns human, we still want to grab a wrench and solve it. We waited while the sun rose and the air warmed fast, sweat starting behind my collar, even though I wasn't moving. When the first other unit arrived, it was a state trooper from the highway, and his radio worked fine until he stepped closer to the hatch. The closer he got, the more his calls broke up, until right at the rim, his voice turned to broken noise. He stepped back, and it cleared again, clean as if nothing had happened. He looked at Dean. "That's odd." Dean didn't blink. "Yeah, it is." They taped off the area, wrote quick notes, and tried to act like adults in charge of something they didn't understand. Dean told Marcy to get me back to the plant, to lock everything, to check every access point we had. Because if somebody had keys, then our whole system was a set of open doors. Marcy drove us back toward town without speaking for a long stretch, hands tight on the wheel. Halfway there, her phone rang and she answered on speaker. "This is Carver," Dean said. His voice sounded like gravel. "We've got another one. Grocery store called. Delivery van is running out back. Driver's missing." Marcy's shoulders lifted and fell like she'd been punched. "Today?" "Just now." I stared out at the fields flashing by, The neat Kansas rose, the calm sky, all of it pretending nothing bad could happen here. The water complaints too, I said. People will start calling when they make coffee. I know, Marcy snapped, and then softened because snapping didn't fix anything. Sheriff, what do you want from us? Check your systems, Dean said. Lock everything. If you see anything you can't explain, you call me before you touch it. After she hung up, she glanced at me like I was a trainee again. You heard him, she said, before you touch it. I heard, I said. But the whole job is touching it. Pumps don't wait for permission. Pressure doesn't care about fear. At the treatment building, everything looked normal at first glance. Pumps were running, gauges steady, chemical feed set where it had been at the end of yesterday's shift. The kind of normal that makes you doubt your own nerves. I went through the routine anyway because routine is a lifeline when your brain wants to sprint. I pulled a sample from the finished water line, tested it, and watched the strip change color slower than it should. The reading came back low. Marcy leaned over my shoulder. That kit's old. It's not that old, I said, and grabbed a fresh strip, new from the bottle. No excuses. Same result. Low disinfectant meant one of two things. Either we weren't feeding enough, or something was consuming it faster than it should, which is the sentence nobody wants to say out loud in a water plant. I pictured people filling cups for their kids, brushing teeth, making baby formula, and I felt a different kind of pressure settle in my chest. Marcy picked up the phone to call our chemical supplier and got nothing, not even a ringtone. She tried another line and got the same dead response. She stared at the receiver. Phones too? I walked to the office window. Across the street, fairgrounds crew had started setting up rides, big metal frames rising like skeletons, bright tarps flapping, a few early vendors unloading coolers. By tonight, the town would be full. Families from nearby farms, college kids home for the weekend, people who didn't know our water system but trusted it like a promise. Town's going to be packed, I said. Marcy rubbed her forehead and closed her eyes for a second. I know. I checked the chlorine feed pump, then the backup. Both showed flow, but the residual didn't match, like somebody was stealing what we were adding. I went to the chemical room and looked at the storage tank. The level was lower than it should have been for the time of day, not by a lot, just enough to be wrong if you lived in numbers the way I did. Marcy followed my gaze. You think someone's been in here? I don't know yet, I said, and hated the words because they were starting to stack up. At 9:40 a.m., the first missing kid report hit the dispatcher in a way the whole town could feel. Not from the river this time, but from the playground by the school, a place with swings and shade trees and parents who look up just enough to believe they're doing their job. A girl named Sophia Trent had been walking with her friend. The friend said Sophia stepped off the sidewalk to look at something near the drainage ditch and didn't come back up. The friend screamed. An adult ran over. Nothing. No footprints on the slope. No movement in the grass. Just that sudden empty space where a kid had been. At 10:15 a.m., Dean came to the plant, and he looked like he'd already lived a full day. Tell me you're not shutting down the water, he said. I'm telling you the disinfectant is low, I said, and someone got into the intake vault with a key. Dean's jaw worked. Keys. Who has them? Me, Marcy, the public works director, I said. A couple spares were kept in a lockbox at town hall years ago. Dean's eyes narrowed at the phrase years ago, like it tasted bad. Years ago. Marcy spoke up, stiff. They're supposed to be accounted for. Dean didn't argue. He didn't have time for theory. He needed ground truth, and he needed it fast. Show me the water tower, he said. Pressure is dropping on the east side. Calls are coming in. Marcy looked at me. We can't leave the plant unlocked. I'll go, I said. Dean can meet me there. Dean hesitated, and I respected him for it, because he wasn't a man who hesitated often. Gavin, if this is tied to the missing people, I don't want you alone. I won't be, I said. I'll be with you. He gave a short nod. 15 minutes. I drove up to the tower on the hill, the one everyone used as a landmark. Kids painted it in art class. Couples parked nearby at night because it felt private up there. It had always been a harmless piece of scenery, a big white cylinder with a red light on top that blinked slow and steady against the stars. That morning, it didn't feel harmless. I saw the wet line first. It ran down from a seam about 10 feet below the top, paint darker there, like it had been rained on in a single narrow strip. It didn't make sense. Tanks sweat in humidity sometimes, but this was too focused, too deliberate. I parked and walked closer, boots crunching on gravel. The ladder cage rose straight up, a metal tube bolted to the side. The access door at the bottom was shut. The padlock was on, again, not cut. A man stood off to the side in the shade, close enough that he could reach the cage door in 2 steps. He wasn't trying to hide. He wasn't pacing or smoking or checking a phone. He just stood there like he belonged, weight balanced, hands low, eyes on my truck rather than my face. My brain did what it always does in a small town. It ran through faces, last names, who he might be related to, which shop he might work at. Nothing clicked, and that bothered me more than if I'd recognized him. I stopped a few yards away, kept my voice level. "Hey, can I help you?" He turned his head a little, not all the way. "You work for the city?" It wasn't a question. "Yeah," I said. "Who are you?" He took one slow step toward the ladder cage, and I saw something in his right hand. Not a gun, not a knife, just metal, small, dense, the kind of thing you could carry all day without thinking. My mouth went dry. I lifted my phone and hit 911 without looking, because muscle memory kicks in when fear shows up. But the screen gave me nothing. No bars, no ring, just a blank refusal. The man noticed the motion and smiled once, quick and flat. "Doesn't work up here," he said. I shifted so the truck sat between us. "Sheriff's on the way." He nodded like that was part of the plan. "Good." That single word tightened my skin. He wanted Dean here. I kept my eyes on his hands. "Step away from the tower." He didn't. Instead, he said, "Open it." For a second, I almost laughed because it sounded like an order from somebody without the right to give it. Then he raised what he held just enough for me to understand. A key ring. Heavy. Not 1 or 2 keys, but a thick set, the kind you only carry if you expect to open doors other people can't. He held it like a threat, and the memory of that intake hatch padlock hanging open with no damage punched through my chest. Dean pulled in fast, dust kicking up behind his cruiser. He got out with his hand near his holster, and the way he moved told me he'd already decided this wasn't a misunderstanding. The man didn't run. He stayed planted. Dean called out, "Hands where I can see them." The man lifted both hands, palms open, and the ring dangled from one finger like a trophy. "Who are you?" Dean asked. The man's eyes went to Dean's badge. "You're the sheriff." Dean didn't answer that because he didn't need to. I said, "Dean, that's the tower access. Don't go in there." Dean glanced at me, then back at the wet streak on the tank. "We need to check it. Pressure is dropping." The man spoke again, calm, almost conversational. "It's leaking. You can see it. You're going to come up and look." Dean's voice stayed steady. "Why are you here?" The man finally looked directly at me. "He'll open it," he said, nodding toward me. "He always opens it." It hit me hard because it wasn't guesswork. He knew the job. He knew the rhythm of it. He'd watched me work, watched me show up when things went wrong, watched me solve problems with keys and valves and habit. Dean extended one hand. "Put the keys on the ground." The man did, gently, like placing a coin. No sudden move, no drama, just control. Dean nodded to me without looking away from the man. "Gavin, grab them with a cloth. Don't touch metal." I had gloves in my truck. I pulled them on and picked up the ring. The keys weren't all for the tower. I recognized 2 from the plant. One was an old brass style we hadn't used in years, the kind you keep because throwing it away feels like losing a piece of control. Marcy's voice flashed in my head, sharp as a file. Spares at town hall years ago. Dean shifted his stance. "All right, you're coming with me." The man's smile came back. "You're coming with me," he said, and pointed at the ladder cage. Dean's eyes hardened. "No." The man's right hand moved fast toward his pocket. Dean drew his pistol. The man froze with his hand halfway in, as if he'd proven a point and didn't need to finish it. His voice stayed soft. "Up there," he said. "It's quiet." Dean didn't lower the gun. "Turn around, hands behind your back." The man shook his head once. "Not like that." Then he did something I still replay because it was so simple. He stepped back into the shadow by the base of the cage and kicked a small object sitting near the ladder door. A plastic case, like a small toolbox, slid across the gravel and skittered to a stop. Dean looked at it for a fraction of a second, the kind of instinctive glance anybody makes when something moves at their feet. The man used that fraction like it was a doorway. He surged forward, shoved a key into the padlock, and opened it in one clean motion. Dean lunged, but he was half a step late. The man grabbed the cage door, yanked it open wide, and swung it toward Dean like a battering ram. The metal edge caught Dean's forearm and knocked his gun hand aside. The pistol didn't fire, but the motion stole Dean's balance just long enough. The man slipped into the cage and started climbing. Dean cursed under his breath and followed because he didn't have a choice. Not with a deputy gone, a kid missing, and a town's pressure dropping. Responsibility will make you climb into places your instincts tell you to avoid. I ran to the cage and looked up. The ladder rose straight into sunlight, rungs disappearing toward the roof hatch. The man climbed fast and steady like he'd done it 100 times, and Dean climbed behind him, one hand on rungs, one hand trying to keep control of a situation that was already sliding away. I shouted, "Dean, stop! Wait for backup!" Dean shouted down, "Stay back, Gavin!" He wasn't being brave. He was being responsible. That was the problem. I didn't climb right away. I forced myself to breathe once. Then I grabbed the keys and the plastic case the man had kicked. Inside, I found zip ties, a small pry bar, and a wrench that matched the bolts on our plant panels. City tools taken from somewhere, not random hardware store junk. That meant he'd been inside more than one place. He hadn't just shown up at dawn with a plan. He'd been moving through our system like it belonged to him. I looked up again. Dean and the man were near the top now, where the cage ended at the roof platform. The roof hatch should only open from inside with a lever. That was our safety measure, because the tank is not a place you want bored teenagers or curious adults wandering into. The man reached it first and didn't stop. He pulled something from his pocket and jammed it into the seam, then leaned his weight like he was opening a stubborn lid on a paint can. The hatch shifted. Cold slid through my shirt, even though the sun was hot. Dean reached for the hatch, too, and in that instant, the man turned and swung the metal in his hand, a short rod with a weighted end, the kind of thing that fits in a pocket and looks harmless until it isn't. Dean's head snapped back. He lost his grip with one hand. His boots slipped. He caught himself, but his body went loose for a beat, like his brain had to find the world again. The man shoved him hard into the rail. Dean didn't fall, but his arm dropped and his pistol clattered down inside the cage, spinning and bouncing until it hit the bottom with a dull smack. My heart tried to climb out of my chest. I stepped into the cage and started up, not thinking, just moving, arms burning as I pulled rung after rung. Halfway up, I saw a dark smear on the metal, fresh, and I knew Dean had taken a hit that would leave him slower. By the time I reached the top, the hatch was open. Dean lay on the roof platform, one knee tucked under him, eyes unfocused. The man stood over him with the same calm posture he'd had on the ground, like he was waiting for a bus. I hauled myself onto the platform and felt the wind up there, hotter and steadier. The town below looked small and unreal, like a model somebody had built and forgotten. I could see the fairground skeletons rising. I could see cars starting to move more as the day warmed. Life went on, which felt wrong. The man looked at me. "You came," he said. I kept my hands low and empty. "Where are they?" He tilted his head. "Who?" "The girl," I said. "The driver, Caleb." His expression didn't change. "Down." He pointed to the open hatch. In that moment, I understood what he'd built. Not a hiding place, a system. He'd used keys to get into city sites, the places people ignore because they're not glamorous, the places nobody stands guard over because they're just infrastructure. He'd moved through our town like it was his workshop, using the quiet parts of it to swallow people whole. I asked, "Why are you doing this?" His eyes flicked to Dean's body. "You keep things running," he said, "even when you shouldn't." He stepped closer, and I saw the rod clearly now, knuckles white around it. "Open the valve," he said. Inside that tower there were valves for inlet and outlet, and there was also the access ladder down into the tank chamber, a confined space with steel walls and damp air, a place where one wrong move becomes permanent. If he got me inside with him, I might not come back out. I nodded once anyway, because nodding buys time. "All right," I said, "but you don't want to foul the water. You'll lose your leverage." He smiled like I'd said something clever. "You know the words," he said. "Go." I moved toward the hatch slowly, body angled so I could still see him, mind racing through options and finding none that felt clean. Then I saw something near Dean's hand. Not his gun, already gone, but his flashlight, the heavy kind with the solid barrel. I dropped to one knee like I needed balance and slid my hand toward it. The man stepped forward. "Don't." I grabbed the flashlight and drove it up into his wrist as hard as I could. He grunted and his grip loosened. The rod clanged against the roof. I didn't pause. I slammed my shoulder into him and we hit the rail together. The tower didn't shake. It felt steady, like it didn't care who fought on top of it. He punched me in the ribs and air left my lungs in a sharp rush. I swung the flashlight again and caught his jaw, hard enough to make him stumble, not hard enough to drop him. He recovered faster than I wanted and grabbed my shirt, trying to haul me toward the hatch. "Down," he said, teeth clenched. "Down with them." The words did something to me. They weren't just a threat, they were a plan. I planted my boots and pulled back, ribs screaming. My mind flashed Caleb vanishing into the dark intake vault, the headlamp beam pointing up like a signal, then nothing. A ladder, a man with keys, a place that swallowed people. My foot found the rod on the roof. I hooked it and kicked it toward the hatch. It slid and dropped into the tower with a hollow clank that sounded deeper than it should have. The man's eyes went to the sound for 1 second. That second was mine. I drove him into the cage door frame, hard, metal biting into his shoulder. He cursed and grabbed the edge to steady himself. I dropped the flashlight into the hatch after the rod, not because it helped, but because I wanted the dark inside to feel less like his advantage. The tower swallowed the light. The darkness down there looked thick, like water without reflection. He lunged at me with empty hands now, and rage finally showed on his face. I stepped back and grabbed the cage door handle, yanked it open wide, then slammed it shut again, catching his arm between door and frame. He screamed, high and raw, and tried to pull free. I leaned all my weight into the door. "Dean," I gasped, grabbing at Dean's shoulder with one hand. "Dean, get up." Dean's eyes fluttered. He tried to move and failed, mouth working like he was trying to say something but couldn't find it. Below us, sirens rose, faint at first, then louder, the sound of backup finally catching up with reality. The man jerked his arm again, and the door started to give. My palms burned against the handle. I couldn't hold him much longer, so I changed the problem. I let the door open just enough to release his arm, and when he surged forward, I stepped aside and kicked his knee out. He went down hard and slid toward the open hatch. He didn't fall clean. He caught the inner ladder with both hands and dangled, legs kicking against the rim, face inches from mine. His eyes were bright with hate and something worse, a kind of certainty. "You don't get to stop it," he said. I didn't answer. I grabbed the hatch lever and slammed it down. The hatch didn't seal fully with him hanging there, but it bit his forearms between metal and rung. He howled and slipped. His hands lost purchase and he dropped out of sight. A second later, something heavy hit metal below, then a long, ugly silence. I stood there with my hand on the lever, shaking, waiting for him to reappear like a bad thought that won't leave. He didn't. Within a minute, 2 deputies climbed up into the roof platform, weapons out, faces tight. They saw Dean on the roof and me braced over the hatch like I was holding the whole town closed. One of them stared at the opening. "Where is he?" "Inside," I said, and my voice didn't sound like mine. They got Dean stabilized and lowered him down with straps, careful and fast. Then they sent a deputy into the tower, then another, like the place had earned their caution and they weren't going to feed it one person at a time anymore. They brought Sophia Trent out first. Alive, barefoot, dirty, wrists bound with zip ties. She blinked in the sunlight like she couldn't remember what daylight was supposed to feel like. And when she saw the uniforms, she started crying without making much sound, like her body didn't want to spend the air on it. They guided Harold Pritchard out next, the grocery driver, looking drained and confused, trying to speak and failing. His hands kept grabbing at sleeves and belt straps like he needed physical proof that people were real. They brought Caleb out last. They didn't carry him the way they carried the others. They carried him like a weight that had turned into a duty. Faces set, eyes forward, no unnecessary words. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need them. The man who did it was still alive when they pulled him from the lower chamber, wedged beside internal baffles, half-conscious and slick with tank water. They cuffed him on the interior platform and hauled him up, and even then he looked calm in the way some people look when they've already decided they're right. They told me his name later. Travis Rudd, 39, a former maintenance contractor for public works, fired 2 years earlier after tools went missing and a work order got forged. He'd stayed in the region, drifting job to job, coming back here when he ran out of places that would hire him. He knew our routines, our shortcuts, the things we told ourselves were safe because they'd always been safe. He'd taken the old spare keyring from town hall long ago. He'd copied what he needed. He'd learned which locks we replaced and which we didn't, which doors got checked daily and which got checked only when someone complained. He picked a day when the fair would fill the streets and the noise would cover anything he didn't want noticed, when people would be distracted by funnel cake and music while he moved through the quiet infrastructure like it was his private hallway. That night, after the deputies left and the tower stood guarded, I drove back to the plant with Marcy. We flushed lines until the disinfectant held. We issued a boil notice and lifted it later after testing, after the samples came back clean enough to let people breathe again. The mayor tried to talk like everything was under control, like a few official sentences could patch what the day had torn open. Nobody believed him. Near midnight, Marcy and I sat in the break room under fluorescent lights, hands still stained from work, both of us too tired to pretend we were fine. Outside, the fair lights glowed in the distance, and the sound of music carried faintly on the warm air like the town was trying to force normal back into place. Marcy looked at me and said, "How did he open that intake lock without breaking it?" I stared at the table, ribs aching every time I breathed, and felt the fear settle into something colder because her question had weight. "I don't know," I said, because that padlock was still mine, and the key ring the deputies collected from Travis had every city key on it except that one. I walked outside, stood by the plant door, and looked up at the water tower on the hill. Its warning light blinked slow and steady against the dark, patient as a heartbeat. I watched it longer than I should have, listening for sounds I couldn't name, and I thought about how many locks in town were only as strong as the last time somebody bothered to check them. Then I drove home, and I checked my door lock twice before I went inside, not because it helped, but because I needed my hands to do something that felt like control.